Super spreaders, let's get it. Are you guys getting audio? Are we good to go? I'm having the streaming software battle, fighting against my own technology. We are going to watch the new film that I just kicked out. Like, what are we, 10 p.m.? So just less than 24 hours ago. I was up to the wee hours with Matthew Ehret and Cynthia Chung creating their new video, and we're going to watch that in a sec. And just while we get people to congregate online. Am I streaming to X? Let me check here. Super Spreaders, Rumble, YouTube, yada yada. Oh, I'm not streaming to X. Let me see if this actually connects. Yeah. Okay. Super Spreaders. It says I'm on X. You guys on X? Hit me up. Shoot me a chat. You guys seeing me? Let's warm up with a little bit of world news. Canadian government proposes GST holiday amid political tensions. Have you guys noticed that with Kamala Harris in the States and now with woke Justin Trudeau up here, as soon as it comes down to it, they suddenly have conservative values. Oh, you know what? Taxes bad. Inflation bad. All of a sudden we care about the middle class and the fact that, beef costs 5 times as much as it did 3 years ago. Have you noticed that? And just watch this. In Canada, we got an election coming by October next year. By law, we have to have an election by October. It could be sooner. And they're just going to run, when it comes to election time, they're going to run as middle-of-the-road conservatives. And, oh, look, we're totally reasonable. Oh, yeah, all this tax stuff is bad. Meanwhile, they want to put 60 cents on a liter of gas. And they think that giving you 2 months off of GST or HST, I'm in the Yukon. This is 5% for 2 months. So let's say I'm spending 100, 150 a week, 600 a month, $30 for 2 months, $60. Thanks, Trudeau. Wow, that's amazing. How about abolishing income tax? Asshole. He thinks this is going to do something. And then, in the meantime, Trump announces a tariff against Canada unless we get the border under control, and he's scrambling to he's having an emergency meeting with the first ministers, the premiers of the provinces. Oh, what are we gonna do? Absolutely amazing to watch how Trump runs other countries, and he's not even in office yet. He tweets that he's going to put 25% tariff on Canada unless we get the border under control. And now, all of a sudden, all these quote-unquote conservative premiers are like, oh, well, we better get the border under control. It's just like NATO. Said, we're pulling out of NATO. We're not going to fund NATO anymore. And all of a sudden, Canada's like, oh, okay, we'll pay more. Absolutely amazing. When will Canada have a leader like this? We've got one waiting in the wings. We've got a populist movement here, the People's Party of Canada. We've got Maxime Bernier, but some people don't like him because he's French. Some people don't like him because I'm not even sure why. They just don't like him. And this is why Canada is going to spiral into a world of shit. We have to stop voting for the Liberals. We have to stop voting for the Conservatives. We have to make a people's movement here in Canada. So what's going on? People watching? Are we getting together? We're going to warm up with a little preview. The gaming industry has become really the new canary in the coal mine for politics. They're having their trucker convoy moment in the gaming industry. You're having leaders in the gaming industry on X calling for complete boycotts of all games if they even give you the option to choose pronouns. Upon that happening, and you guys know that liberals have been evacuating Twitter en masse to go to Blue Sky, which is a super lame Twitter X copy that was set up by the previous CEO of Twitter, Dempsey. And they're all over there just, smelling each other's buttholes and reporting each other. And the lead art designer on a new game from one of the industry giants, Obsidian Entertainment, their new game Avowed is coming out, and this guy has decided to take a slightly different approach to promoting their upcoming game. Let's watch a little bit of this and react to it. This is just a warm-up. We're going to watch the film in a sec. I just want you guys to join in and get in the chat.
Obsidian Entertainment has a major problem on their hands right now, and that problem is called Matt Hansen, who continues to go on unhinged rants on Blue Sky, attacking anybody who...
I gotta tell you, I love this guy. This is Smash JT. Excellent citizen reporter who's kind of come out of nowhere and in just a few months has come to 100,000 subscribers. He's got insiders from the gaming industry giving him inside information. It's incredible. But dude, can you get your mic to sound like you're not recording in your bathroom? For fuck's sake. I've left comments in his videos many times. It's just the guy's, he's at the point, he's at 100,000 subs almost. He's making money on YouTube. Like, treat your room. Make it sound better. It sounds like he's in his fucking bathroom.
Who dares to disagree with his ideology, going all the way to the point of not caring if any of you buy the game he's been working on for the past 5+ years. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Smash JT. And this dude, Matt Hansen, who I covered in a previous video, I thought was going to be just a minor blip on the radar.
Look at this
one of
guy.
Those, crazy developer stories. He said these random things that are really bad, and he apologizes and moves forward or ignores it, doesn't say anything more, and people just move on their merry way and people continue their life with everything else. But no, he's decided to double down and triple down now that he's gotten Elon Musk's attention. He knows all eyeballs are on him, and he can't wait to ruin this game for everybody just to own the chuds. And how far this guy goes, I wouldn't believe it if I didn't see these with my own eyes. JT. Hit that subscribe, give me a like, and check out smashjt.com for the full article breaking down.
Yeah, everybody give Smash JT, give this guy a sub. I mean, this is where to be. The gaming industry is now turning into politics, and we're seeing gamers are just now completely revolting against the Marxist left in gaming, they've been sitting there working on their games for 10 years, and now they're dropping their products, and it's just one absolute failure and bomb after another. We're seeing results, new video games coming out from AAA companies. Sony releasing a game that can't even get to 10,000 players worldwide when you're expected to get to 1 million players. We're seeing games drop to like 80 people playing them worldwide. Complete, absolute failures. Gamers have had enough, just as Americans have had enough. Now, Canadians have had enough. Are we going to have the gumption to do this in Canada? Are we going to stand up against this shit? Or are we just going to sit here and be like, it's all right? Anyway, we'll continue a bit on this, and then we'll watch the movie.
A new series of Blue Sky tweets, messages, I don't even care what Blue Sky calls them, This is an unhinged rant where he is straight up attacking people that disagree with his ideologies, and oh, by the way, of course, he's extremely racist. Matt Hansen, the crazed art director for Avowed, the highly anticipated first-person fantasy RPG from Xbox and Obsidian Entertainment, is back in the news already, making even more waves for all the wrong reasons. Hansen's social media presence has continued to raise eyebrows across the entire landscape repeatedly, and he shows zero signs of slowing down as he continues to stir debate with inflammatory remarks and complete and utter open disdain for the entire gaming community. It's gotten so bad that you'd think that Obsidian Entertainment would take this guy's side and be like, bro, ease up on the social media posts right now. We don't need this heat when we got a game coming out. Can you maybe just, I don't know, kind of hold back your opinions, especially when it comes to politics, ideology, and racism? If we could just kind of not say that stuff right now and let the game get out there on its own, let people buy it, then you can be as crazy as you want. But right now, don't do that. No. Obsidian doesn't care. They're letting this guy have free reign, taking the entire company down with him, all the way to the point where you think Microsoft would be looking at their studio from Xbox in Obsidian and saying, hey, we understand you guys want your employees to be free and feel free and allow them to speak freely, because yeah, they say they don't represent their company in their Blue Sky account or their Twitter account, but still, they represent the company. In response to a Cincinnati.com article saying, opinion, we must have compassion for those on the losing side of the presidential election. And Fane Greenwood said, I also firmly believe that we need to crush these people's spirits into blood and earth, not be nice to the amoral supporters of an aspirational, gore-soaked dictator.
Gore-soaked.
Okay, obviously TDS, and they hate Trump, and they hate right politics.
Where's
and all
the
that
gore?
Kind of stuff. Got it. Kind of crazy, kind of weird, kind of lunatic. That's what a lot of these people on that side do. How does Matt Hansen handle it? They
what
need to
gore?
feel the sting of shame for
what
the
blood?
rest of
What is
their
he talking
putrid
about?
lives, to be honest. And that is me being nice. Okay, take a step back. What? Who hurt you?
This is the art director of a game that probably cost $100 to $200 million to make, and he's out there just shitting on the normal gamers. Anyway, all right, so we've had our little kind of trailer section. I just want to make sure people that are going to watch are watching. Let's watch the new movie, Like a Phoenix, The Death and Rebirth of America, focusing on the Weinstein brothers. This is new to me. I'm not usually one to take issue with individuals in the cause, but Matt and Cynthia thought this was important, and you watch the film and you see if you agree. Here we go.
The United States is quickly moving into a period of turbulence and fire which hasn't been experienced in generations. The danger of economic and social chaos domestically and wars abroad threaten to tear apart the fabric of modern civilization. Meanwhile, division among the population of the United States spell potential disaster as the flames of civil war are in danger of lighting the Republic on fire. Amidst this danger, an influential network of intellectual influencers resistant to the encroaching tyranny of technocracy has emerged as the intellectual dark web. The term itself was coined by none other than Eric Weinstein, which his brother Rhett Weinstein is also a member. Some of these figures came together for a rally of patriots in late September of 2024, showcasing their faces on a painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware, implying an obvious parallel between Washington's strategic victory of 1776 and the convergence of so many influential thinkers today. However, throughout the speeches, something odd was heard. Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist, host of the now famous Dark Horse podcast and regular guest on dozens of popular shows, stood upon the podium overlooking a live crowd of thousands and online crowd of millions of viewers and told a story about America's origins.
When children absorb the content of their culture, it isn't just facts and skills. The most important things we pass between generations are myths, stories that are so powerfully important they are encoded in a special sacred layer. And in our case, the myth we need comes to us from the Greeks, the founders of the ancient West, the one from which the modern West ultimately emerged. It is the story of the phoenix, a mystical bird that instead of making chicks, lights its nest ablaze and raises anew from the ashes. Watching the modern West burn, I believe it is no accident that this story points us to a hidden solution, a remedy for which we just so happen to have the ingredients.
After developing the image of the phoenix rising from the ashes, Brett turned his attention back to the foundations of America with an anecdote that would probably make Benjamin Franklin turn in his grave. Brett stated,
In 1787, Ben Franklin was asked if the Constitutional Convention had produced a monarchy or a republic, and Franklin famously replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." Today, what we must deliver is a republic, if we can phoenix it. And so, in closing, I ask you to think about the job we must do to phoenix our republic. It is for such moments that the Hopi elders tell us, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
The shocking statement, "A republic if we can phoenix it," was how Bret Weinstein decided to end his speech, followed by an unblinking audience who clapped and cheered loudly with clearly no understanding whatsoever of what Bret was in fact calling for. Bret was prescribing a cure for the West's demented senility, where death and destruction were the hidden solution, and that we just happened to have the ingredients for a crisis that is to see the West burn. And we have Bret's brother Eric, who has played a leading role in manufacturing the migrant crisis hitting the United States as we speak, to thank for those very ingredients. But more on that later. Let us first start with the relevance of Bret's emphasis on the phoenix as our myth, our story, that we now need to embrace in order to, quote, save the Republic. The symbol of the phoenix within the United States should already be well known. In fact, it should be infamous. It was the symbol chosen by the CIA to represent Operation Phoenix that was executed during the Vietnam War. That is how the phrase, "burn the village to save the village," became known around the world. After all, the program was named after the phoenix for that very reason. According to the myth, the phoenix obtains new life by rising from the ashes after it dies in a blaze of fiery flames before being born again. Weinstein adds that it can only create anew by lighting its nest on fire, for which he is clearly calling for the West to light itself on fire in order to save itself. That is, the phoenix can only achieve birth through destruction, and thus so must we, if we accept this as our creation myth. During the Vietnam War, countless villages were destroyed, in some cases with whole communities slaughtered by U.S. troops, such as the My Lai massacre. Over the course of 10 years of war, over 1 million Vietnamese were murdered, including countless civilians, in order to, quote, protect the free world from authoritarianism, end quote. The name for the most violent terror, assassination, and psychological warfare campaign came to be known as Operation Phoenix. When Operation Phoenix was exposed to the public, the American people were rightly horrified and disgusted that their government could have participated in such heinous acts of torture, illegal imprisonment into perpetuity, re-education camps along party propaganda lines, and other forms of brutality. According to Douglas Valentine, the author of The Phoenix Program, At its height, Phoenix managers imposed quotas of 1,800 neutralizations per month. This does not account for those who were tortured and imprisoned for months to years before they were released. Operation Phoenix was the beginning of a new form of warfare, counterinsurgency. Thus, the U.S. Army, under the direct purview of the CIA in Vietnam, would indoctrinate the next generation of recruits, beginning in the 1960s and continuing to this day.
At the request of the South Vietnamese government, we are helping peace-loving people learn how to defend themselves. Here, in a remote setting, there is new emphasis on the importance of the individual fighting man, as a teacher as well as a leader.
Who were taught that it was their role to not only neutralize the enemy through such pacification programs like the Phoenix program, but to take part in that country's reform on all levels, including politically, economically, and culturally. Increasingly, anything that had to do with policing activity would also fall under the purview of the CIA. This included police activity within the United States as well, where Green Berets increasingly took over the management and directive of police forces within their own country, using tactics that were clearly not for the increased safety of the American citizen. Vietnam was to be the first experiment applying this on a massive scale. It was to be the first where there would be an attempt to create an entirely new nation that would be reborn out of the ashes, after having been severed from its cultural past along with its values and traditions. Vietnam would be the first country to undergo shock therapy, as the CIA had done to individuals under the MKUltra program, which saw hundreds of thousands of unwilling human guinea pigs processed through psychoactive drugs, shock therapy, sensory deprivation, and other forms of torture. It was the belief of those military psychiatrists managing MKUltra that they could wield the power to write history anew, to erase all memory of the past and have a blank slate to which they could write down whatever they wish, not just wiping out the memory of one person, but of an entire people. Counterinsurgency warfare and its executioners, the U.S. Special Forces, was never a friend to the American people, since these techniques were first practiced in Vietnam, having always had the intention and purpose for application in the Americas, where today it has finally come home to roost. And thus, it should come as no surprise that the origin of Operation Phoenix, just like MKUltra, comes out of England's Tavistock Institute, which launched the beginning of the era of mind control experimentation. In their official overview of their own history, in 50 years of the Tavistock Clinic, the Tavistock Institute makes no secret of their rebirth, which had risen out of their pact with the British military during World War II, to which they reference as Operation Phoenix. During World War II, John Rawlings Rees, the director of Tavistock, became chief of the psychiatric service of the British Army, which progressively involved more and more of the Tavistock staff. With Tavistock's close union with the British Army, they had shifted their focus from curing the individual of neuroses to the idea that possibly one could cure all of society all at once. Soldiers that were suffering from various forms of neuroses became the subjects that the Tavistock psychiatrists could perform their experiments on without the concern for red tape, consent, or even legal ramifications, since the military had its own code of law. It was through these group therapy experimentations, such as the Northfield experiments, that a cybernetics-like application of Tavistock-based psychology would begin to influence society on all levels. H.V. Dix writes in 50 Years of the Tavistock Clinic,
By 1942, we were already beginning, in such spare time as we had, to plan our post-war shape and policies. In 1942, John Rawlings Rees laid out in the Tavistock Report on Future Planning the role of area psychiatrists as some sort of medical officers for mental health, covering the country from a military point of view, and other similar matters. The trend of Tavistock thinking in terms of a broad mental health program was clear. Selection and aptitude for a job as a stress-reducing measure could beneficially be transferred from the army to industry and civilian life in general. An increase and coordination of provincial work would lead towards a more satisfactory psychiatric service for the country as a whole.
Everyone was now regarded as a patient of the Tavistock Institute, whether they wanted to be or not, since the entire society had become sick and neurotic from the two world wars, and it was up to Tavistock to implement psychiatric policies that would affect all levels of society to ensure mental hygiene of its subjects. Mental hygiene was in fact a concept that was promoted by Tavistock and became central to the World Health Organization, which itself was founded by a Tavistock psychiatrist named G. Brock Chisholm in 1946, followed by the World Federation of Mental Health in 1947, founded by none other than Tavistock president John Rawlings Rees. Dix, himself a Tavistock psychiatrist, described this transformation at Tavistock.
It was during this latter part of 1944 that the change started through military service in the relationships between official psychoanalysis and the Tavistock group was carried a long step further, with considerable repercussions on all our subsequent history. I had a private meeting with John Rickman and John Bowlby, both influential psychoanalysts from Tavistock, and all of us in the army at the time, to discuss possible collaboration and the shape of things to come. Rickman and Bowlby shared the common viewpoint of the Invisible College and saw in the Tavistock a ready-made centre for implementing the new dynamic social psych.
So are you guys seeing something here? Mental health, mental hygiene, mental health awareness. That we're just immersed in this stuff now. And we have to be super sensitive to people's mental health, and you have to have a mental health awareness, and everybody's got anxiety disorder and blah, blah, blah. And this started 80 years ago. That's what I love about working with these guys, just finding the historical background behind this stuff. Absolutely incredible.
Psychiatry.
Here, the reference to the Invisible College is interesting when situated within the context of an inner sect of social engineers wishing to transform society in an alchemical reset. The formation of the Invisible College run as an esoteric society of Rosicrucian Kabbalists that took over control of the English government after the ill-fated Republican English Civil War of 1640 to 1649 is another important consideration to hold in mind when trying to make sense of the vast influence that the British Empire and its Royal Society wields over the structures of scientific practice internationally. Many of those leading Kabbalists, including Robert Flood, Elias Ashmole, Robert Boyle, and even Sir Isaac Newton, were incredibly influenced by Rosicrucian alchemist Michael Mayer, whose belief in phoenixing within his ceremonial magic shaped the growth of the Invisible College. In order to see through this shape of things to come, there would have to be a purge within the Tavistock Institute itself that would get rid of the older generation, except for a few who they considered allies, and any younger staff who did not agree with the new direction of social psychiatry. Along with this purge came the entry of British Army psychiatrists. Anyone who remained in Tavistock would have to be supportive of the new symbiotic relationship between psychiatry and military. The Rockefeller Foundation would play a central role in this purge and new direction, dictating its orders through threat of withholding donations which Tavistock primarily relied upon as financial support. Interestingly, one of Tavistock's greatest minds, at least from their point of view, was Wilfrid Bion, who had made a name for himself in his group experiments within the military hospitals. From these experiments, he came up with his concept of
Okay, so this little bit here we're about to hear from Wilfrid Bion, studies of groups. Everyone pay attention to this and tell me if you think that this doesn't ring true.
Of group dynamics. Bain asserted that whenever a group is formed, it seeks a leader to follow. Moreover, he claimed in his book, Experiences with Groups, that in the absence of a formal leader who satisfies the group, the most mentally ill member of the group will be treated as an informal leader.
Right? Is he wrong? Unless a group is in a formed structure, and you know exactly who your president is, your vice president, your secretary, your HR department. In the absence of that, a group will get behind the most mentally diseased person. And does that not speak to where we're at as a society right now?
Quote, in its search for a leader, the group finds a paranoid schizophrenic or malignant hysteric if possible. Failing either of these, a psychopathic personality with delinquent trends will do. Failing a psychopathic personality, it will pick on the verbally facile, high-grade defective.
It's so true.
There is no doubt that Vietnam was once again used as one large experiment in this. It is also no coincidence that we see such delinquent leaders in charge of their troops in Vietnam in the majority of Hollywood movies, such as in Platoon and Apocalypse Now.
Who's the commanding officer here?
Ain't you?
I love that. Who's your commanding officer here? Ain't you? Like the guy doesn't care. He doesn't care, but he's firing. You know, he's probably killing dozens or hundreds of Vietnamese people. He doesn't even know who's in charge. And that's the Vietnam War, and that is now the Ukrainian war. It's just, and Syria. We just send our kids over there without any directives and create violence and war. It's horrific.
It was a repetitive formula since life was imitating art, and it appears that it was engineered to be that way. Another noteworthy individual is Kurt Lewin, who was not directly a member of Tavistock, but was another symbiotic partner, you could say. Kurt Lewin is a giant in the field of psychology and was influential in the development of the Frankfurt School. It was Lewin who would first coin the term group dynamics. He theorized that when a group is established, it becomes a unified system with supervening qualities that cannot be understood by evaluating members individually. Lewin focused the study of social psychology of small group communication and created the founding research and training in group dynamics, including establishing the participative management style in organizations. In addition to group discussions, he became increasingly interested in group membership. He was curious as to how perspectives of an individual in relation to the group were solidified or weakened. He tried to come up with the way identity was constructed from standpoint and perspectives. These were the beginnings of what ended up developing into groupthink. Lewin started to become quite interested in how ideas were created and then perpetuated by the mentality of a group. H.V. Dix sums it up as follows.
The larger Tavistock organization of the last 20 years, with its clinical and its social research wings, thus became a natural nodal point for that transdisciplinary field we may call community psychiatry, sociatry, and mental health, ranging from the social development of the human infant to the dynamics of the largest human group, seen as evolutionary continuities.
One of their projects in the military is described by H.V. Dix as
a special army research department called the Directorate of Biological Research, whence issued such things as operational research groups and many slightly undercover operations, contributing to military statistical and epidemiological research. The military effort for which A.T.M. Wilson, Tavistock psychiatrist, should chiefly be credited was the development of the civil resettlement scheme, the prototype of one aspect of the therapeutic community.
No, no, no.
The civil resettlement scheme had already been implemented in Vietnam by the time H.V. Dix had written those very words in 1970. On January 20th, 1954, the CIA authorized Edward Lansdale to create the Saigon military.
This guy, Edward Lansdale, he ends up featuring heavily in the... Any of you guys watch the film Men Who Stare at Goats? This guy is part of that. It's weird shit.
Mission. This unit was led by U.S. Special Forces under Lansdale's direction and was in place by July 1954. The Saigon military mission, led by U.S. Special Forces under the direction of Lansdale, recruited Vietnamese to take part in Psy-war tactics to provoke a mass migration of northern Vietnamese to leave their ancestral villages after centuries of having lived in this one location. Over 1 million northern Vietnamese were herded into South Vietnam by Lansdale's Saigon military mission, the largest mass migration to have ever been facilitated directly by another country ever. These northerners were convinced to travel to the south, where they were promised security from whatever was presently causing them to frantically leave the north, thanks to the U.S. Special Forces Saigon military Psy-war tactics. This was made possible by the Geneva Accords in July 1954, which established the 17th parallel as a temporary demarcation line separating Vietnam into North and South Vietnam with separate governments. On top of this decision to cut a country in two with no heed to what the people living in said country actually wanted, the Geneva Accords also laid out that, quote, any civilians residing in a district controlled by one party who wish to go to live in the zone assigned to the other party shall be permitted and helped to do so by the authorities in that district. It was sold to the Western public as a peaceful and humane transfer of those who did not wish to live in Ho Chi Minh's North Vietnam. It was, in fact, the kindling that would be used to light Vietnam on fire and justify the entry of the U.S. military in a war with no declared military objective. Colonel Fletcher Prouty served as a liaison officer between the Pentagon and the CIA between 1955 and 1963. He writes in his book, The CIA, Vietnam, and the Plot to Assassinate John F. Kennedy.
These penniless natives, some 660,000 or more, were herded into Haiphong by the Saigon military mission and put aboard U.S. Navy transport vessels. About 300,000 traveled on the CIA's civil air transport aircraft, and others walked out. They were transported like cattle to the southernmost part of Vietnam, where despite promises of money and other basic support, they were turned loose upon the local population.
The outcome of such a mission was predictable. Chaos would be unleashed in South Vietnam, with those destitute needing to resort to desperate measures, and those wishing to defend their villages also put in a desperate situation. Unbelievably, it was purposely made even worse by the U.S. puppet regime in South Vietnam, threatening any village that would help these displaced peoples who had now suddenly become the communist enemy. It was also used as an excuse for why the Diem government now had the right to enter any village and interrogate, remove to prison, or even kill on spot any individual that was suspected in colluding with the enemy. It was the CIA's Edward Lansdale who was the advisor and controller of Diem's overnight government of South Vietnam. So what is the relevance today with Brett's calling for phoenixing the Republic? Enter Eric Weinstein. Once again, Geneva would find itself in the middle of another manufactured migrant crisis. Johnny Vedmore writes in his paper, Eric R. Weinstein's Great Replacement.
The United Nations International Labour Organization in Geneva set up the Migrant Division. To lead the unit, the UN appointed Manolo Abella to be Chief of Migrant, who is now linked with the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the University of Oxford, and others. Essentially, the UN decided that the democratic voters of a nation-state would oppose unfettered economic migration, as we are experiencing today, and the folks at this globalist entity believed they knew better. To achieve their goal, the United Nations needed to subversively introduce this agenda in an undemocratic manner without gaining the consent of the native citizens of the democracies that they were to target. The man they chose to analyze and map out this scheme, which many refer to now as the Great Replacement, was Ehret R. Weinstein, who has since become a central figure in the intellectual dark web, along with his brother Bret Weinstein. Ehret Weinstein was employed by the UN to produce a document entitled Migration for the Benefit of All, towards a new paradigm of economic immigration. Weinstein was aware of the damage which economic migration was to do to the native populations in places such as the United States and the United Kingdom. In one part of the document he produced for this nefarious United Nations agenda entitled Preference for Migrants Undercutting of Natives. The Weinstein plan was always going to cost the government money, as we see unfolding today. A meticulous and proactive plan would have to be enacted by the nation-state in question to deal with the impact of large-scale migration, and the author makes this clear in the document, with Ehret R. Weinstein stating,
"In effect, the government would assume all the administrative and transport costs for a group of migrants, as well as calculating the additional external impacts of hosting them. To indicate these costs, the government would calculate the expected migrant impact cost as a function of a number of migrants. Such a function would be expected not only to grow as the number of migrants increased, but also to do so in accelerating fashion, because of concern for the environment, monitoring costs, societal stress, and security risks."
The problem of ghettoization and issues relating to long-term native shortages are brought up by Weinstein as known consequences of the redistribution of income away from native populations, but at no point are these problems expressed as reasons not to force economic migration upon target populations. In this United Nations document, Ehret Weinstein specifically pushes Marxist ideology concerning the redistribution of income and wealth which benefits economic migrants at the expense of the native population. Ehret Weinstein proudly advertised his work for the United Nations on his website at the time, as well as posing himself as an expert on the subject. Under the title of International Migration, Weinstein even had a special email address for issues concerning migration where it was written,
If you are interested in the creation of efficient markets for facilitating increased international labor migration, please contact me at migration@ehret-weinstein.net regarding the article Migration for the Benefit of All, to appear in 2002 in the International Labor Review.
The work of Ehret Weinstein in publicly working for the United Nations in facilitating an increase in migration to target native populations, despite the known detriment to the native population, including ghettoization, should seriously call into question Bret's dramatic reveal on the Tucker Carlson show about the Chinese parasites in Panama who are presently building bridges and roads to facilitate trade. How evil indeed. Bret, who was taken on a tour by Green Beret Michael Yan, attempted to convince Americans that 100 Chinese men at a construction camp for said bridges and roads construction were secretly facilitating the migration crisis hitting the United States.
So you wonder why there's not a permanent team of New York Times reporters there trying to tell the rest of us what exactly is happening. If 500,000 people move through there in 1 year, how did you wind up there?
Well, I wound up there because Michael Yan had been sending me materials, thinking that I would be interested in what was taking place in Panama. And of course, I was utterly fascinated by what I was seeing. Now, some of your viewers may not know Michael. Michael is a former Green Beret who has refashioned himself. Well, the last time I was on your program, I talked about Goliath.
Yes.
And if there's a Goliath, there's a David. And I would argue that Michael Yan is like David's eyes. He's been traversing the world trying to understand a story that as yet has no name. And that story is partially in the Darien of Panama, and it's all sorts of other places, including in various UN installations. There's some story that is difficult to piece together, and he's been physically traveling to all of its various epicenters and showing people.
And that is the story of mass migration.
The United States government is facilitating this economic migration, and it's unmistakable, as is an organization called the IOM, which is the International Organization for Migration. It's a branch of the UN. And if you read their charter, you will discover that this organization believes that migration is an inherently good thing, that it's always good. And so they see it as their job to bring it about, to facilitate it. And in this case, that's particularly tragic because their desire to induce people to migrate is causing people who are woefully unprepared for the Darien Gap to try to make that journey. And the humanitarian tragedy is immense.
So the UN, of which the United States is, I think, the largest donor by far, is paying for this with the U.S. government.
Yep.
Do you have any sense of how many these are Chinese nationals?
They seem to be.
How many did you see, ish? Talking 60 or 600 or?
It's very hard to say because we were held at one edge of the camp. So I probably saw 150 faces.
According to Brett in this interview, the UN is orchestrating the migration crisis that is hitting the United States in order to ultimately cover up a Chinese military invasion to which Brett accounts for 150 men who are not even clearly identified as in fact intending to travel to the United States. With the information now having come to light on Brett's brother Eric Weinstein's direct role in working for the UN to bring this very migration crisis about that Brett is discussing, Brett's testimony has now become very ironical. It would appear at this point that Brett is either in on the very conspiracy which he is exposing to the world, that is, the Chinese conspiracy to invade the United States, or the more probable case is that the Weinstein brothers have been caught orchestrating a scenario which clearly does involve the UN in weaponizing migration, causing internal havoc within the United States, including actions by the US government and military, claiming they have been captured by the Chinese government.
I guess I didn't say this. 25 years ago, I worked in Panama. I lived on Barrow, Colorado Island, which is an island administered by the Smithsonian Institution in the Panama Canal. So I had the privilege of living in the canal for 18 months, and I got very familiar with the canal zone. I was well familiar with the canal zone because the canal zone, in fact, the military, this was before the handover to the Panamanians, so the military made it possible for the Smithsonian to work there, and we were constantly interacting. We were going on their bases. We'd go on their bases to watch a movie. So we were using this military infrastructure, which has now all been handed over to Panama. The U.S. Southern Command is a segment of the military dedicated to protecting American interests in the Caribbean and all of Latin America south of Mexico. And it has this impressive structure in Fort Clayton. So it was both physically there to protect the canal, and it was metaphorically this imposing presence looking out over...
to project power south.
Absolutely.
Note the close relationship Brett himself acknowledges between the Smithsonian Institute and the U.S. military. This will be extremely relevant to our story shortly. According to Brett, U.S. military bases around the world are a good thing, but building bridges and roads are very bad, perhaps because the latter encourages economic sovereignty. Viewers should be made aware that Panama was in fact part of Colombia until the United States invaded the country in the early 20th century. America, under Theodore Roosevelt, had become involved in the construction of the Panama Canal using the same French engineer who constructed the Suez Canal. During this project, Theodore Roosevelt demanded that Colombia sign a treaty turning the isthmus over to a North American consortium. Colombia refused, and in 1903, Theodore Roosevelt sent a U.S. warship with soldiers to invade the land. Panama was seized from Colombia and became a colony of the United States, and the Canal Zone was established, harboring several American military bases for almost a century. The Panama Canal Zone's American military bases were later used by the Green Berets to train death squads during Operation Condor. Though Brett claims that these American bases have more recently left Panama, this is a false statement, which can be clearly seen by the continued presence of the U.S. Southcom military infrastructure. It again is ironic that Brett brings up that these former bases have been taken over by the UN, again insinuating a Chinese involvement, when in fact it was his brother, Ehret, who is tied to these very policies. Thus, we have Brett's Smithsonian Institute pairing with the U.S. military on one side, and Ehret's pairing with the UN on the other, leading us to what appears to be the same destination point: self-annihilation. The Green Berets, in fact, have had a military base in Panama for several decades now, as well as a centralized computer system, Kapukami Condortel, which not only has access to all security information over Central and South American borders, but was used during Gladio's Operation Condor to coordinate death squads after they were trained at these very Panama bases by the Green Berets. During the 1970s, something that had already been implemented in Western Europe under Operation Gladio and Vietnam under Operation Phoenix began to expand upon these models of Orwellian parallel states and clandestine warfare and implemented them in Central and South America, organized under a centralized computer network that had been set up by the Americans, known as Condortel, specifically relating to Operation Condor and Kapukami as a more broad American purview, which oversaw and connected all of these parallel states in coordination with each other, implementing hunter-killer squads modeled off of and trained by the Green Berets of the Phoenix program. J. Patrice McSherry, author of Predatory States, writes,
"The Condor system linked together secret units within the military intelligence forces of member countries into one transnational group or organization focused on extraterritorial action. A former agent of Chile's secret police referred to the organization's commanders as the Condor Group. In each country, Condor operatives were drawn from branches of the military, intelligence organizations, and police, and also included right-wing civilians, all operating under centralized military command. Cover Condor operations were state policy under the military dictatorship of the era, but were carried out largely by..."
Just want to go in on Moniker here. We import cocaine via banana trade network established in 1910. So true. So true. We sent in, under the cover of World War I, we were sending troops into Central America and South America to secure all the cash crops down there, the banana wars and all this stuff going on, secured regime changes, horrible, disgusting dictatorships that killed thousands, tens of thousands of their own people in all these areas that, before the mass media in the late 19th century, early 20th century, Smedley Butler from America, the most decorated military officer in history in America, speaks of it openly. They went down there and secured all of Central America and all the fruits and markets and down there for the corporate structure in America. Yeah. Monica, you're one of the good ones, man. You're always on it. I love it.
by special squadrons that were top secret and not known to all government or military officials.
These Condor squadrons, that is, death squadrons, were explicitly structured to mimic the U.S. Special Forces team, aka the Green Berets. Thus, it was the Vietnam Phoenix program, which was the first to implement for Americans the new form of warfare, counterinsurgency warfare, that was executed by the Green Berets. In fact, Condor squadrons were often trained directly by Green Berets, often in the Panama Canal Zone, and in certain situations, Green Berets had accompanied these Condor death squadrons.
War is a racket. Yes! Smedley Butler. Everyone alive needs to read War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. The guy outlines how his Marines were used around the world not to ensure justice for the working man around the world, but to ensure profit for corporations. And then, once he was retired, they tried to get him to do an actual insurrection. Not a bullshit January 6th insurrection, but an actual insurrection, an actual coup d'etat to take over the American government for fascists in the 1930s, involving George Bush's dad, George, original J. Bush, his dad, a bunch of asshole Wall Street bankers whose kids are still running around telling you that Trump is a Nazi. These guys actually tried to organize a coup d'etat to take over the American government, to create a fascist government. Unreal.
Squadrons on specific missions. Patrice McSherry writes,
The Condor Network's secure communications system, CondorTel, enabled Condor controllers to
Okay, so looking at this, Jonathan says FDR's family got rich on opium wars and why he was keen to taunt Japan into World War II. And this was Monroviated for South America. Interesting take, right? So I've had a real kind of battle going on where, my clients here, we're watching, a video that I've directed for my clients who are Canadian Patriot Press, Rising Tide Foundation, and they're actually really pro-FDR. So I have a kind of a struggle going between really smart people that are very historically informed, that like FDR, and then others that hate FDR. And it's really interesting that, to me, one of the tiebreakers is that they tried to kill FDR. There was an assassination attempt that was 100% exactly like Kennedy's assassination attempt, with a weird foreigner that was the lone shooter, and he was killed. He was given the death penalty, and that was carried out within weeks of him being declared guilty. And God, I would be surprised if more than 10% of Americans know that FDR actually had an assassination attempt, and that this guy Giuseppe Giancarlo, I'm just going off like phonetic memory. It was like a perfect Italian. This is back in the time when Italians were considered anarchists. So you had this stooge, crazy guy that was considered the obvious, he's just a lunatic who wanted to kill the president. And the actual governor of, is it New York or New Hampshire or somewhere up east, had died in the attempt, and people got wounded. It was a real assassination attempt, and no one knows about it. No one talks about it. And for me, that leans me a little bit into that maybe FDR is cooler than we thought. I mean, you look at the guy he's got his corncob pipe, and he's like obviously a millionaire, and he comes from money, so he's probably, a shithead. But then again, he had a system of, it's like almost socialism, right? Like the New Deal is socialism almost, but it's socialism focused on building dams, on building trains, on and then you hear his speeches. You hear the speeches that he gave during and after the Great Depression, calling out the banking class, the money lenders. It's almost Trumpian, the way that he speaks. So maybe FDR was kind of like a Kennedy, certainly born into wealth and certainly a privileged class, but perhaps with some radical ideas about equality that the people at the top just wouldn't allow, and they tried to kill him, but instead, when they failed, they just went into a world war. And that's what I wonder with Trump. Like, so Trump's in, and so now it's too late to change the policies. So will they now go to a world war and make it doesn't even matter what Trump thinks anymore? You're now in a world war situation, and you've got to do this and that. It's kind of like the pandemic. It's fine, Trump's in power, he's an asshole, but we're just gonna have a pandemic, and now he can't do anything. Any of these, conservative premiers and governors and presidents, they can't do anything. Otherwise, we'll just declare that they're killing citizens by not going along with the pandemic, and they can do that with world war. You're killing innocents, freedom lovers around the world by not going along with our World War III policy. And that's what I wonder about moving forward. And so, I'm of a mixed mind. FDR was probably kind of like cool like Kennedy, but I'm not entirely convinced. He does seem like he's totally system money. Maybe he was a cool money kid. Maybe he's total asshole. But then you got to explain the assassination attempt, right? So yeah, it's tricky. What are you guys saying here? Jonathan's saying yes, they would want to get rid of the competition who considered his State Department was London-based, right? But you can say the same thing about Trump. Trump was good, but his first cabinet was just a shit show of neocons and London assholes. Moniker's saying Roosevelt flooded productive farmlands for free energy. Yeah, right. Interesting. I'd have to learn a little bit more about that. Jonathan says, true heroes arrive as surprised and confused as the crowds who transform with them. FDR rose to the occasion. Well, that I think you got a point. There's a real point there, and you can see that in Trump. I think Trump arrived to the presidency with a certain amount of ego and gusto, just like, watch me, I'm going to own these fucking assholes, and then quickly found out it's not really like that. And now this term, when he's already announced like 4 or 5 things before he's even gotten into power that's changing the world landscape, and I'm hoping, we got real hopes for the guy when he gets in next time. Hydroelectrics are now 100 years old, designed for 75. Right, but then again, do we have a big record of hydroelectrics that are failing just due to being old? As far as I know, most of the ones that were built even 70, 80 years ago are still running. Just a question, not arguing with you, just a question. And electricity isn't cheaper. Well, that's a whole different thing, right? I just moved. I'm in the Yukon now, but I spent the last 15 years in Ontario in Canada, and they spent the previous decade making these horrible deals with wind farm companies, solar farm companies, hydrogen companies, where they were subsidizing them to be shitty at making electricity while making us pay for them being shitty at electricity. So they just made us pay more for coal, which was making electricity at the normal rate. They made us pay more for that to subsidize assholes who couldn't make electricity efficiently. Wind, solar, hydrogen, all that crap. And within 10 years of the Liberals being voted into office in Ontario, in Canada, we had the highest electric bills in North America. And that's how it goes, right? And Jonathan says, I don't know, Trump could think he's already accomplished plenty for record books and won't fight the techno takeover. Republicans are great at forgetting the working folk. I would agree traditionally, but I don't think Trump is. I don't think Trump is, and I don't think the movement around him is. I think it's really, truly at this point, when you're looking at, you're beyond this kind of the ego fantasy that Trump is like, I'm going to be president. Yeah, so he did that. He's been shot at. All this shit. I think it's actually a populist movement at this point. You know, I'm not looking to... I'm Canadian. Trump is American. He's not going to save me from anything. I just think it's an honest-to-goodness movement. I think Trump, honestly, to goodness, believes what he's saying and is going to try to do what he's saying. I think he felt it last time, but he was a political idiot. He was a rock star at being cool and being electable and being, you know, number one in the public's mind. But he was a political moron. And he ended up agreeing to having fucking idiots surrounding him. But I mean, he just declared a Jay Bhattacharya as his candidate for what was it, the health services or something? Like, this is total anti-vax, anti-COVID, anti-mRNA doctor, and he's gonna put this guy on the fucking charts. Like so, it's a totally different Trump this time. And as he's often said, he could be just tanning, right? He could be really just enjoying his wealth. If the guy really was just a dictator, he could be a dictator in his own little world because he's a quasi-billionaire. He could just sit there and hot bitches could serve him lattes and drinks and he can tan, and he doesn't need to do any of this, let alone get shot at. You know, so yeah, I don't want to get too carried away with it, and I'm never going to throw down that I think any person is a savior for us. But the closest you're going to get is an actual populist movement behind someone like Trump. It isn't him, it's the people. The people have gotten behind him, and he's already learned. Remember when he started his campaign? Right when he started his campaign for this election cycle, he would come out to full stadiums and declare the vaccine, and we did so well with the vaccine, and there's 100,000 people booing him. So he's learned too, and he's modulated his voice, and he's learned. So, you know, he's not the savior, the people are. And in America, Trump has served as a conduit for the people to such a degree that you've had their entire Congress flip red because the people have had enough. And Canada needs this too. We need this bad. So, you know, it isn't that Trump is saving us. It's that we are saving us. The people are saving us. And this is why I focus on gaming a lot lately. Gamers are saving gaming. People are saving politics. People are saving their own countries. And you don't need the guy that you're voting for or the party you're voting for to be perfect. They're gonna, you know, they to get in power and to keep power, they're gonna have to make some concessions. But to get there, they're gonna need us. It's about the people. So Trump this time has won entirely on the voice of the people. He's the closest to what the people want that they voted for him. He might be totally off on some things, but he's close enough that, you know, 80% of us are voting for him. And we need this in Canada. We need a populist movement in Canada. And then we can have a populist North America that can just be aligned, dig up shitloads of oil, get super rich, drive up the Bitcoin, drive up the oil prices, drive down the oil prices, but drive up the profit. Let's go. All right, let's watch some more of this film. You guys are way too fascinating. We don't have too much left. 11 minutes. Let's go.
Exchange data on suspects, track the movement of individuals across borders on various forms of transport, and transmit orders to operation teams, as well as share and receive intelligence information across a large geographical area. CondorTel allowed Condor operation centers in member countries to communicate with one another and with the parent station in a U.S. facility.
So this is wild. This is the 1970s, and we're talking about CondorTel and all this shit, like computer networks, monitoring communications. Jonathan, holy shit, man, what do you do? I'm putting that up on screen. I like the cool Vetica font. Kind of official while being groovy. Bro, like, you edit video. You edit video or you make website graphic design. How did you even get there? That was actually a big struggle for me, choosing cool Vetica for this documentary. I wanted a font that had the statelyhood of Helvetica, but I liked the fun angle because we were doing the 1960s, so I kind of wanted to have this groovy, just like you said, this groovy element because we're in the 60s, we're doing the Vietnam thing. But each letter is just like Helvetica, except for like the T's and some of the other letters are kind of funky. Holy shit, man, you got a good eye. Dude, I've designed video editors in LR. Okay, all right, bro. Well, there you go, man. You earn the right to critique.
Facility in the Panama Canal Zone. This link to the U.S. military intelligence complex in Panama is a key piece of evidence regarding secret U.S. sponsorship of Condor. Operation Condor had access to an encrypted or encoded system within the secure U.S. communications network based in the Canal Zone.
Thus, the Panama Canal Zone was the official headquarters for CondorTel, and was also the headquarters for the American training schools such as the U.S. Army School of the Americas, where Green Berets stationed in Panama were training the death squads of South America and Central America. This apparatus is still in place today under the United States Southern Command, aka U.S. Southcom, located in Doral in Greater Miami, Florida, that is one of the 11 Unified Combatant Commands in the United States Department of Defense. It is responsible for providing contingency planning, operations, and security cooperation for Central and South America and the Caribbean for the force protection of U.S. military resources at these locations. U.S. Southcom is also responsible for ensuring the defense of the Panama Canal Zone. Just taking a look at the banner for the U.S. Southcom makes it rather clear that it considers itself as the head commander over security within Central and South America. It should be noted that the emphasis on the U.S. Southcom's website for their role in ensuring the defense of the Panama Canal and the Canal area is a prerogative that continues to this day, a prerogative that has existed for over 50 years. Yes, Brett and Michael Jan's sounding the Paul Revere alarm is looking rather suspect indeed. And Brett's brother Ehret is at the very center of this migrant crisis. Coincidence? Likely not. But maybe Brett is innocent despite the creepy reference to our need to phoenix the Republic. Maybe Brett doesn't know about the sinister history of the Green Berets or the sinister activities of his very own brother. Well, Brett himself is a disciple of the Smithsonian Institute and had a close relationship with the U.S. military bases, as he himself stated in his interview with Tucker while he was in Panama studying tent-making bats. Brett also has a direct connection to Game B, which is interested in topics of catastrophic and existential risk, civilization and institutional decay, and collapse, as well as progress, collective action programs, and social organization theories. Sounds rather on par with Tavistoc's Operation Phoenix, after all. Through the 19th century, native bands were continuously promised land and supplies to support their people. These promises were consistently broken to the point of causing mass starvation amongst those who found themselves boarded up in reservations, otherwise known as concentration camps. The Native Americans were destitute and suffering from abject poverty and starvation. From this desperate situation, the Smithsonian anthropologists came in with their rewrapping of old creation myths to fit what they now wish to be promoted as a sort of new religion, or great narrative, as the technocrats managing the Great Reset call it today. In other words, the Smithsonian Institute was promoting their select amalgamation of creation myths to convince the Native Americans that their suffering was happening for a reason, and that there was a way out of the suffering, through them essentially being reborn again out of a cataclysmic event. This rewriting of creation myths was led by anthropologist social theorist Lewis Henry Morgan, who effectively wrote the Bible for the Smithsonian Institute with his works The League of Iroquois in 1851, followed by Ancient Society in 1877. Morgan was to combine the symbols and lore learned or concocted in these interviews with Native Americans with a certain amount of rewarmed Jesuitical embellishment. This was likely no coincidence. Though vehemently anti-Catholic in his writings, Lewis Henry Morgan would nevertheless pay homage to the Jesuits.
The privations and hardships endured by the Jesuit missionaries, and the zeal, the fidelity and devotion exhibited by them in their efforts for the conversion of the Indians, are unsurpassed in the history of Christianity. They traversed the forests of America alone and unprotected. They passed the ordeal of Indian captivity and the fires of the torture. But in the midst of all, they never forgot the mission with which they were entrusted. The fruits of these labors of Christian devotion are yet visible among the descendants of ancient Iroquois, for the precepts spread among them by the missionaries are still in the Indian mind, and many of them have been incorporated by them into their own religious systems. The intercourse of the French Jesuits with the Iroquois furnishes, in some respects, the most pleasing portion of their history.
After all, the Jesuits had set the stage and written the manual on cultural and spiritual manipulation. Morgan was simply following the path already cleared by the Jesuits. It was the Jesuits who had gone to live among the tribes in newly occupied colonial areas, such as in Canada, Paraguay, and Asia, and who had been accepted as the brothers of the Indians. It was the Jesuits who had skillfully portrayed their religion as so value-free as to accommodate itself to any system of belief. Recall the Jesuit maxim, all things to all men. The Jesuits were so successful in this that they were even adopted into the tribal leadership. They then played a mediating role with the outside world of fur traders, liquor merchants, and colonial military officials. The Jesuits educated the tribe about its uniqueness and hence unsuitability to be integrated into Western scientific culture or agricultural settlements. They were the ones who created the Master of Life religion, which would lead to the infamous ghost dance religion that led to the massacre at Wounded Knee. The Master of Life religion existed at least as early as the 18th century, where it made its appearance through French Jesuit manipulation of Pontiac, which created the myth of Pontiac's prophecy. This Master of Life religion would take many forms over the years, including influencing Tecumseh's brother, the Shawnee prophet, which led to the massacre of their people, who were told that they would be invincible to bullets. This religion, with its prophets who would lead their people to their doom, would be repeated over and over again until the ghost dance religion. The prophecy would repeat that the people were suffering because they had accepted foreign influence, and in order to purge themselves, they either must die and be reborn again, or they would be granted powers and become invincible. They were promised that when the day of salvation arrived, through a cataclysmic event, all their dead would return and everyone would live forever young. The ghost dance religion would be no different, except this time, the prophet claimed he was Christ returned. Interestingly, the Mormons had a great deal of influence in this particular religion. The prophet once again promised his people that they would be invincible to the white man's bullets, which led to the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, but was followed by many massacres all across the United States, for the religion had inexplicably traveled within a short time from west to east across the entire country and adopted by various tribes. It was a promise of salvation through one's own destruction. I suspect that the Smithsonian Institute also played a role in nudging this process as well as gleefully documenting its effects, which we see arising most transparently today. This is why Brett ended with reference to the Hopi elders, who have a prophecy that we need to go through purification, just like the prophecies of the Master of Life religion, and this will bring us lasting peace over the world's people. But before this can occur, we will have to go through a cataclysm. This is what Brett Weinstein is attempting to bring about again today, a new ghost dance religion where we are told that our salvation lies in our embrace of our very destruction, with the promise that we will rise from the ashes and be reborn again.
All right, there we go. So, boom. I didn't schedule this, well in advance. I just missed live streaming. So the last week has just been a crazy drive to get this film done. And now that it's out, I just wanted to share it. And I'm so glad that a couple of the hardcore dudes showed up here on YouTube and in Twitter. It's so good to hear from you guys. Especially we got Monica. You were saying you're a little bit Indian. It's a crazy story. It's a lot. There's a lot more to consider than just what we've been told. There's a lot more going on. I had grown up, hearing that, Wounded Knee and these leaders, they were crazy. They were, spiritual beasts, and they thought they were immune to bullets, and they would just do the ghost dance. And then I get with Matt and Cynthia from Canadian Patriot Press, and they're telling me that this is a Jesuit insert, that they went in there and this is the first attempts to influence an entire nation, an entire culture, and create a religion for them, and that they were doing this in Vietnam, and oh my God, and that now exactly what they learned from each of those attempts over the centuries is exactly what's happening to us now, and that it isn't a wild conspiracy theory. It's a absolute scientific fact. These assholes have been studying this for 200 years. And we're just the morons at the end of the chain going like, what? Huh? Wait, what? Wait, that's not true? Huh? So, that's why I like working with these guys. That's why I love making these videos with these guys. And it's a great success. It's been up for less than 24 hours. And I think it's at 3,000 views, for a Canadian channel. That's crazy. That if we were an American channel, that would be 30,000 views in 24 hours. So it's going really well. And that's what I wanted to get to tonight. I want to say thank you to Monica and Jonathan for being so active in YouTube chat. And we're going to be up a lot more. I've just been in development hell and been a little bit quiet, but we'll be back and you guys join us. So you just watch your notifications on YouTube and Twitter. Make sure you join.